My sister said, maybe Santa skips kids who don't fit in when my daughter got nothing on Christmas. Everyone laughed except me, so I quietly stepped outside, made one call, and on day 4 they found something in the driveway that made them scream. You didn't. Christmas morning in Joliet wasn't supposed to feel like a punch to the throat, but that's exactly what it felt like when my 8-year-old daughter, Leela, looked up at me with those shaky eyes and whispered, "Why did Santa forget me?" Her voice was so small it barely carried over the sound of wrapping paper ripping and adults laughing too loudly at their own jokes. My sister Danielle's living room smelled like cinnamon rolls and fake cheer, the kind of holiday sweetness that coats the air but doesn't soften anything real. I was kneeling beside Leela on the carpet, one hand on her back, when Danielle spoke. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't hesitate. She just looked right at my daughter, my shy, gentle, autistic little girl who had been trying so damn hard all morning to just blend in, and said, "Maybe Santa skips kids who don't fit in." Silence hit the room for half a second. Then it snapped open like a wound. My brother snorted. My mother laughed the kind of laugh she uses when she wants to pretend something cruel is harmless. Even Danielle's husband chuckled as he handed another gift to their son, like the moment hadn't just gutted a child right in front of him. Leela stared at the floor. Her fingers twisted the hem of her sweater until her knuckles turned white. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. I didn't trust myself to. My phone was in my hand before I even realized I'd grabbed it. My pulse was thudding in my ears so loudly the room blurred. I stood up, walked into the hallway, and shut the door behind me. Their laughter kept leaking through the cracks. I dialed a number I never thought I'd use. Not for family. Not for something like this. But there are limits, even for blood. The person on the other end picked up on the first ring. "It's me," I said, hearing the tremor in my own voice. "I need that favor, the big one, today." A pause. Then a low, steady reply. "Say the address." When I stepped back into the living room, the laughter dimmed, but no one apologized. No one checked on Leela. No one even looked at the empty spot under the tree where a single wrapped box for her would have changed everything. We left without saying goodbye. For the next 3 days, I didn't take calls from any of them. Danielle texted once, "Something wrong?" But the message tone was so smug I didn't even respond. My mother tried the guilt route. My brother sent a meme. None of them understood what they'd done and none of them cared to. But they would. Because on day 4, just after sunrise, when the cold hit the pavement like shattered glass and the neighborhood was still half asleep, a truck rolled quietly down Danielle's cul-de-sac. The driver followed my instructions exactly, placement, timing, everything. I wasn't there to watch it happen, but I didn't need to be. I already knew what it would look like from the angles I'd planned. I knew how it would feel when they opened their front door expecting another peaceful winter morning. Instead, they found something waiting for them in the driveway. Something they never saw coming. Something that made every single one of them scream. Before that Christmas morning in Joliet, I'd spent years convincing myself my family's cruelty was just rough humor, that they didn't mean the sharp edges of the things they said, that somehow I was too sensitive. I told myself that lie because the alternative, that they actually enjoyed cutting me down, was harder to swallow. But the truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in 3 precise blows over the past decade, each one carving out the space that led to that moment when I finally picked up my phone and made the call. The first blow hit when I was pregnant with Leela. I was 26, scared, and newly single after her father bilayed the second he heard the word ultrasound. My family's response wasn't support, it was ridicule disguised as concern. My mother said, "You always pick the wrong men," like my heartbreak was a personality flaw. Danielle smirked across the table and muttered, "Some people just aren't meant to be parents." She said it softly, but not softly enough. That was the day I learned their version of love had conditions I was never going to meet. The second hit landed when Leela was diagnosed with autism at 3. I had walked into that pediatric office terrified but hopeful, thinking the words would give me a roadmap. Instead, they became ammunition for the people who should have been our safety net. At a family barbecue in Plainfield, Danielle watched Leela stack rocks into neat, perfect towers and said, "She'd be normal if you disciplined her." My brother added, "You baby her too much." My mother just sipped her wine and looked away. Not one person asked how I was handling therapies, evaluations, sleepless nights. Not one person tried to understand her. Their impatience grew into resentment, and I grew quieter, gritting my teeth through every holiday. But the third blow, the one I still feel in my chest when I think too long about it, came 2 years before the Christmas incident. Leela had been invited to Danielle's daughter's birthday party, and she was so excited she practiced saying, "Happy birthday," in the mirror for 2 days. But when we arrived, Danielle pulled me aside before we even made it to the backyard. "I think it's better if she sits with you," she said, nodding toward Leela, who was twisting her fingers but smiling. "The other kids get overwhelmed by her. Quirks, quirks. Like my daughter was a defective appliance. We ended up leaving early because Leela started crying when she realized she wasn't allowed to participate in the games." Danielle later texted, "It's not my job to make other kids comfortable around her." I never forgot the wording. Not your daughter deserves patience, not how can we help. Just a cold reminder that Leela was always going to be the outsider to them. After that, I stopped expecting acceptance. I only hoped for neutrality, a quiet holiday, a moment of simple kindness. But on that Christmas morning, when Leela stood in a room full of gifts that weren't hers and asked why Santa skipped her, the truth crystallized with brutal clarity. They had never misunderstood her. They had excluded her on purpose. And Danielle's comment, "Maybe Santa skips kids who don't fit in," wasn't a joke or a slip. It was everything they'd ever believed said out loud. So when I stepped into that hallway and made that call, I wasn't reacting out of rage. I was responding to years of warnings I'd ignored. I was finally choosing my daughter over the family that kept abandoning her. And what I set in motion that morning would rewrite all of our lives. After we left Danielle's house that Christmas morning, something in me hardened, not instantly, but in slow, grinding clicks, like a lock turning after years of rust. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't shake. I didn't even speak. I just drove through the frozen streets of Joliet, while Leela leaned her head against the window, silent in that way she gets when she's trying not to fall apart. When we got home, I wrapped her in the blanket she likes, the soft blue one with frayed corners, and sat with her on the couch. I told her Santa didn't forget her, that sometimes grown-ups were cruel without realizing it, that she wasn't the one who didn't fit in. But she looked at me and whispered, "Why does Aunt Danielle hate me?" I didn't have an answer. Not one she deserved to hear. After I put her to bed, I walked into the kitchen, opened my laptop, and stared at the glow until the screen blurred. I felt something rising inside me, not anger exactly. Anger burns hot and messy, and this was cold, clean, controlled. It was a sudden, sharp understanding that nothing was going to change unless I changed. The next morning, I got up early. I canceled holiday plans. I turned off my phone. While Leela played with the modest gifts I'd given her, small things I'd worked overtime to afford, I started making lists. Names, dates, patterns, things Danielle and the others said that I had swallowed because I wanted peace more than justice. The list was longer than I expected, but the real shift happened on day 2. That was when I called the one person outside my family I trusted, Marcus. We'd gone to high school together in Crest Hill. He was the type who kept to himself but watched everything, the kind of man who built a career out of understanding systems. Insurance, property, loopholes the average person never notices. After losing his home in a fire years ago and dealing with a nightmare of structural fraud, he had gotten licensed as an investigator. He owed me a favor for something that happened long ago, something I never thought I'd cash in. Until now, he picked up with a quiet, "I figured you'd call eventually." "I need information," I said. "On Danielle, her husband, their finances, the business, everything." There was no hesitation on his end, only a slow exhale. "You want this to hurt?" "No," I said. "I want this to mean something." For the next 2 days, while snow kept piling up along the windowsills, Marcus and I worked like we were preparing for a siege. He dug into public records, business filings, county permits, loan documents. I learned things about my sister's perfect suburban life that she never thought I would uncover. Every detail sharpened my resolve. Every late-night call with Marcus stripped away a little more of the fear I'd carried all my life whenever it came to my family. At the same time, I was transforming in quieter ways. I spent more time with Leela, watching her rebuild trust in tiny, careful steps. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I started planning my moves with intention, like someone who finally understood she wasn't powerless. By day 3, I knew exactly what needed to be done. Not some petty stunt, not some emotional outburst, something structured. Irreversible. Something that struck at the one thing Danielle valued more than her superiority, her image. The setup was ready by day 4. The call was already made. And the thing waiting in their driveway, the thing that ripped the screams out of them, was only the beginning. Because the first twist was coming, and even I didn't see all of it until it landed. I didn't see it happen in person, but I heard about it within minutes. At 7:12 a.m. On day 4, Danielle opened her front door to retrieve a package. Instead, she found a flatbed truck parked halfway up her driveway with a bright orange notice bolted onto the side of the cargo. Foreclosure seizure, Cook County Enforcement Unit. Except it was Cook County. It wasn't enforcement, and it wasn't foreclosure. It was every document Marcus had uncovered about their mortgage fraud, printed, enlarged, laminated, and mounted on industrial boards. Falsified income statements, shell company transfers, fake renovation receipts, even a copy of the home equity line they'd pulled using a contractor's forged signature. All displayed in full view of every neighbor living in that tightly wound subdivision off Hennepin Drive where image was everything. But the real twist wasn't that they screamed. It was why they screamed. Because underneath those documents, secured so tightly the driver had to use reinforced brackets, was a second display board. This one bearing the name and signature of the whistleblower who had submitted an anonymous report to the county fraud unit 2 months earlier. The signature was Danielle's husband's. Not mine, not Marcus's. Her husband, Craig, the quiet, stiff, accountant-type man who always looked like he was calculating everyone's worth, had already turned on her long before I got involved. And he hadn't just reported her. He had built a case. According to Marcus, the timeline was brutal. 3 months ago, Danielle had taken out a personal line of credit in Craig's name without telling him. She forged his signature to fund a neighborhood leadership project, which was really just a way to cover their winter vacation and keep her spotless reputation as the perfect PTA mom. But Craig had discovered it. And instead of confronting her, he documented everything. Every withdrawal, every falsified form, every shady business expense from the home staging company she claimed to run but barely operated. He had submitted the evidence quietly, methodically, setting her up for a controlled detonation whenever he chose. But he hadn't expected my move. He hadn't expected this display to appear in the driveway, and when he stepped outside after hearing her scream, he looked like someone who had seen his secret go public before he was ready, wide-eyed, pale, caught completely off guard. My plan intersected with his betrayal in a perfect, vicious collision. While neighbors gathered, phones out, whispering, Danielle collapsed to her knees, clawing at the boards, ripping at the laminated sheets like she could somehow undo the truth if she destroyed it fast enough. Her voice cracked as she shouted Craig's name over and over, but he just stood there, frozen, realizing his private weapon had just been detonated in the most public way possible. This wasn't just humiliation. This was exposure of something he'd been using to corner her quietly, for divorce leverage, for custody leverage, maybe even for financial restitution. Now it was blown out into the open, undeniable, uncontained. By noon, half the neighborhood had photos. Some sent them to local real estate gossip groups. One woman posted a video to Facebook captioned, "PTA Queen Exposed." But the part I didn't expect, the part that changed everything, came that night when Marcus called. "You need to hear this," he said, his voice low. "The fraud unit got an anonymous tip this morning about who put the display on the driveway." My stomach tightened. "Craig." "No," Marcus said. "Danielle." I gripped the counter. "She told them you did all the forged paperwork." And just like that, the revenge I thought I controlled twisted into something else entirely. Something darker, something personal, something that would turn the next chapter into a war. The moment Marcus told me Danielle had given my name to the fraud unit, something inside me shifted from cold anger into something sharper: precision, calculation, survival. I stood in my kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, while the refrigerator hummed behind me like nothing in my world had just caught fire. "She really said it was me?" I asked. "She did more than say it," Marcus replied. "She gave them a statement, claimed you forged everything, and planted the documents to sabotage her marriage." I let that sink in. Danielle hadn't just panicked. She hadn't just lied. She had weaponized the same system she thought she could control, against me, against a single mother who had never once done a thing to harm her. "And the fraud unit?" I asked. "They're curious," he said carefully. "Not convinced, but you're officially on their radar." For a moment, I felt the old version of myself slip in, fearful, apologetic, desperate for the conflict to stop. But then I heard Leela humming in her room down the hall, her voice soft and steady, grounding me, and the fear crystallized into resolve. Danielle thought she could burn me to save herself. She'd spent years treating me like I was disposable. What she didn't understand was that I had finally stopped being afraid of her. "Then we go all the way," I said. Marcus didn't argue. "What do you want to do?" I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out a spiral notebook, and drew a line down the center of the page. On one side I wrote, "What she did." On the other, "What she thinks I won't do." I already knew the next steps would require restraint. Rage would get messy. A clean revenge needed to be surgical. First, I gathered everything Marcus had uncovered, not just the mortgage fraud, but the PTA fund discrepancies, the unreported income from her fake business, the disbursements from the neighborhood beautification grant she mishandled. She thought the world revolved around perception, that her curated life in that sterile suburb shielded her from consequences. But paperwork doesn't lie. Second, I secured an attorney, not for defense, but for documentation. I wanted timestamps, affidavits, digital trails. I wanted a file thick enough that if Danielle tried to twist the narrative any further, I'd have a timeline the fraud unit couldn't ignore. Third, I began preparing the part that made my hands shake, not from fear, but from the moral weight of it. Because this was the moment I had to decide whether I was willing to expose not just Danielle, but the ecosystem that enabled her cruelty. The PTA president who covered for her, the grant administrator who let her slip by, the realtor friend who signed off on improper valuations. They all thought she was untouchable, but they didn't know I had every receipt. And yet, part of me hesitated, not because I wanted to protect them, but because Leela would see the fallout. She would see her mother become the epicenter of a scandal. Even if I was right, even if I was justified, I had to ask myself what kind of legacy I was building for her. Marcus sensed the silence on my end. "You're thinking about Leela. I don't want her to grow up learning that revenge fixes everything," I said quietly. "No," he replied, "but she should learn that you protect her from people who try to hurt her." That was the moment the hesitation died. On day 5, I started putting everything into motion: file preparation, scheduled submissions, timed releases to the correct agencies. Not the chaotic blast Danielle expected, but a deliberate, untraceable unraveling of her entire facade. But before I could finalize the last step, Marcus called again. This time he wasn't calm. "You need to sit down," he said. "There's something we missed, something big." And what he told me next didn't just change the plan. It blew a hole right through the center of it. I was halfway through organizing the file that would end Danielle's public life when Marcus called again. His voice wasn't steady this time. It carried a tension I hadn't heard from him once throughout this entire mess. "You sitting down?" he asked. I was pacing the living room, adrenaline still pushing me forward. "Just tell me." "I found something in the grant records you sent me," he said. "Something that didn't add up, so I dug deeper. And then I checked county archives. And then the state ledger." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "You remember that neighborhood beautification grant she claimed, the $48,000 one she got approved 2 summers ago?" "Yeah," I said. "The one she spent on the backyard remodel." "That's the thing," he said. "She didn't spend it on the remodel." I stopped moving. "What do you mean she did?" "She never touched it," he said. "The money was transferred into a secondary account the same week it was issued. Not her account. Not Craig's, a third name on the deed, someone who shouldn't exist. A cold chill crawled up my spine. Whose name? There was a long pause. Yours. I felt everything in me drop at once. I never, Marcus, I never. I know, he cut in. I know you didn't, but someone created a business filing 2 years ago listing you as a silent partner, a fake consulting firm. It looks like Danielle's handwriting on the signatures, but the state doesn't know that. As far as the books show, you were the one who siphoned the grant money. The world tilted. I gripped the back of the couch to steady myself. She built a paper trail in your name, Marcus continued. A year before that Christmas, this wasn't panic, this wasn't heat-of-the-moment retaliation. She planned this. The words hit like ice water. Danielle had forged me into her schemes long before I ever retaliated. She built an entire financial crime around my identity and tucked it away like insurance, something she could pull out if she ever needed a scapegoat. And on day 4, when she realized her secrets were out, she didn't hesitate. She activated the trap. I felt sick. What happens if the fraud unit sees that? I asked. Marcus exhaled. It won't just be investigation. It'll look like you laundered grant money. That's felony territory. She didn't just try to humiliate you. She tried to bury you. For a long moment, I didn't speak. All the plans I'd made, all the careful steps, all the restraint I had forced myself to maintain, they suddenly felt small compared to the scale of what Danielle had been building behind my back. This wasn't a family feud. This was premeditated destruction. But there's more, Marcus said quietly. I also checked who notarized the business filing with your forged signature, and it wasn't some random clerk. You're not going to like this. I waited. It was your mother. The air left my lungs in one violent rush. My mother, not indifferent, not complicit by silence, actively involved. She had notarized documents that framed me. She had helped Danielle engineer the trap. The two people who raised me to believe loyalty was the measure of worth had decided I was more useful as a shield than a daughter. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Not anymore. This wasn't about reputation or humiliation or winning a petty war. This was survival. And now I knew the truth. Danielle wasn't afraid of losing everything. She was afraid of me surviving her plan. And that meant the next move wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about ending the entire structure they'd built, permanently. Marcus didn't have to tell me to brace myself before he revealed the rest, but he did anyway. His voice had dropped into something almost careful, like he understood he was about to confirm the thing I'd spent my entire adult life pushing down and refusing to name. You need to know why they did it, he said. Not the paperwork reasons, the real reason. I felt the room tighten around me. Then tell me. He sighed once heavily. 2 years ago, when Danielle filed that fake consulting firm under your name, there was an email chain between her and your mother. I pulled the metadata, it's real. The language isn't vague, it's explicit. My throat felt raw. What did it say? He read it slowly, like he didn't want to, but he needed to get the words right. We need a failsafe, she's irresponsible. Emotional always has been. If things go sideways with the grant, she'll take the fall cleanly. No one will question it. She already looks overwhelmed. People expect failure from her. My mother wrote that part. Then Marcus continued with the next lines, Danielle's. Exactly, she's fragile. That's her use. If the numbers don't reconcile, we'll frame her for mismanagement. It'll protect the house, the kids, and Craig's job. She doesn't have the resources to fight back anyway. Those sentences cut through every old wound I had, carving deeper than I thought they could. All the years I'd believed I was the family burden, the disappointment, the one who never quite measured up, they hadn't just seen me that way. They had counted on it, counted on my quiet nature, counted on my isolation, counted on the fact that I would fold instead of fight. Is there more? I whispered. Marcus hesitated. Yeah. The part that explains everything. He read the next exchange. Mom, she clings to that kid, that's her weak spot. Danielle, exactly. If she even suspected us, she wouldn't risk attention because of the girl. She'll stay small. She always does. I had to sit down. They had weaponized my love for my daughter. They had calculated that my desire to protect her would keep me silent, make me a perfect target for their insurance fraud and grant manipulation. They thought I'd choose invisibility over conflict every single time, not because they misjudged me, but because they never believed I could be anything else. Why? I finally asked. Why go that far? Why destroy me just to keep their lives tidy? Marcus didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, like he was saying something ugly but true. Because they don't see you as family, he said. They see you as leverage. A pawn, the expendable one. Someone whose life has just enough struggle that if she gets crushed under the wheels, no one looks twice. Someone who won't be believed over them. A hollow pressure filled my chest, like everything inside me had been scraped raw. My mother, my sister, they didn't fall into cruelty accidentally. Their reason wasn't fear, it wasn't greed, it wasn't desperation, it was clarity. They believed I was built to take their damage, and they believed I always would. For the first time in my life, something inside me snapped clean. Not messy, not emotional, not frantic. Just a quiet, precise break. They thought I wouldn't risk attention. They had no idea what I was willing to risk now. Because revenge wasn't the point anymore. This was about reclaiming the life they tried to bury me under. And when the final move landed, it would land with purpose. Not rage, not pettiness, truth. And truth, in the right hands, can ruin a person far more completely than any act of revenge. I didn't sleep the night after Marcus read me those emails. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the words I'd copied down by hand. We need a failsafe. She's fragile. She'll stay small. They thought I was a safety mechanism, a buffer, a body they could throw under a moving train if their own lives veered off track. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not destroy them, expose them. My revenge had to be clean, not for their sake, but for mine. For Leela. She deserved a mother who could look her in the eyes without being poisoned by the same cruelty she'd been forced to absorb. So I built the final strike like a structure, careful and deliberate. First, I organized a packet for the state grant auditor, a complete timeline showing the forged consulting firm, the falsified documents, the fake signatures, the missing funds. I included the metadata Marcus had extracted, the notarization logs my mother signed, and screenshots of the email chain. Then I added a sworn affidavit stating I was stepping forward as the victim of identity fraud. Second, I sent a mirrored packet to the mortgage fraud unit, tying in Danielle's shell companies, the falsified income statements, and the loan misappropriations. I included the evidence Craig had submitted, the same evidence he thought he controlled, formatted with timestamps that proved he'd known about Danielle's crimes long before she tried to frame me. Third, I sent a digital version to 3 people who mattered more than any agency. The PTA board president, the neighborhood grant liaison, and the real estate firm Danielle volunteered with, all of whom had quietly enabled her for years, all of whom cared more about reputation than loyalty, all of whom would turn on her the second her image became a liability. It didn't take long. By noon, the PTA president emailed me a short, frantic message. We had no idea. We're suspending her pending review. By 3, the grant liaison called, her voice shaking. I need to talk to the county. This is serious. By 5, the real estate firm updated their website, Danielle's profile removed. But the final piece wasn't digital. It was physical. I printed the email chain, every line of it, and delivered it to the same enforcement office Danielle had tried to weaponize against me. I didn't accuse her. I didn't explain the Christmas morning cruelty. I simply stated the facts: identity theft, forged signatures, coordinated fraud, notarized documents involving a family member. The clerk read the pages twice. Then she looked at me and said, "You're doing the right thing coming forward." When I walked out of that building, the winter air felt clearer than it had in years. The fallout hit fast. 2 days later, county investigators arrived at Danielle's house. She cried in the driveway, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. Neighbors watched from their porches, phones out. Her children were ushered inside while Craig stood rigid on the step, not comforting her, not defending her, just staring like he'd been waiting for this moment to happen. By the end of the week, my mother received a notice, too. Her notarization logs flagged for fraudulent activity. She tried calling me 6 times. I didn't answer. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, after the dust had settled just enough for silence to feel heavy again, I sat with Leela on the couch. She leaned into me, her small hand resting on my arm, and whispered, "Are they still mad?" "No," I said softly. "They're just facing the truth." She nodded like she understood more than I wished she did. I didn't tell her the rest, that I felt lighter, not triumphant, resolved, not vindictive. Revenge hadn't healed anything, but truth had cleared the ground. It had cut out the rot so something else, something honest, could grow in its place. That night, when I stepped outside to take the trash to the curb, I paused at the edge of the driveway. The air was cold enough to sting, the sky sharp with stars. For the first time, I didn't feel small, and for the first time, they finally did.